I'm Ron Smith, a colleague of Ken's, and I have a story to tell. Ken was one of the most impressive bowlers I have ever met personally. When he came to the English department in 1968, he rescued a team of pathetic individuals who had no anchor, no courage, nothing. In fact, we used to meet at my apartment before I got married to bolster our courage before each match. And we were a happy bunch of bowlers, but we were not very good. Ken came along, and believe me, he wowed everybody. We became a respectable team overnight. He was our anchor. He was our courage. Anything Ken wanted to do, he could do with this English department bowling team. It was a faculty league, in case I didn't mention that. Anyway, Ken pretty typically rolled a 180 or better game. And always, when there was a tough match going, Ken could be relied on to pull out his very best tricks and go much higher. I don't know what his average was, but he looked like a pro bowler. I mean, he had form and motion and result all in one package. It was there. That's the Ken Brewer most people who read poetry don't know about. I do.
My name's Michael Nichols, go by Mick. Ken and I and Jack Sherding and Grant Reese and Press Thomas and Ty Booth, and there's quite a number of us, spent a lot of time together hunting. A lot of times as those other gentlemen sort of withdrew from it or moved away or whatever, Ken and I were left alone to hunt by ourselves, and we did a lot of that. The great challenge was always finding geese. We could get ducks, we could get pheasants, but getting that wary goose was an ongoing challenge. One late fall, we were heading up towards Weston. We did our hunting in Idaho, and we crossed the Bear River and looked down, and here were a bunch of geese on the river itself. And we knew sort of how to get to that spot, and we had permission from the farmer to hunt down there. So he went one way and I went the other, and we both tried to sneak up on these geese. There was something peculiar about the geese, though. They didn't seem to be all that much afraid, and they seemed rather fat, and they didn't exactly look like Canadian geese either, which was the most normal goose that we hunt around here. But there had been occasional sightings of snow geese, and these were white geese, and Ken was pretty well convinced that this was probably a group of snow geese. So we went down there, and as I got closer and closer, and as he came in closer and closer, I began to realize that these were not snow geese. They were too big, they were too plump. But still, we started moving down. About the time I made my actual identification that these were probably a group of feral geese, they got up and started to fly out, and Ken nailed one. He was so happy. He had a goose, finally, but of course we had a big debate afterwards over whether this was a wild goose or a feral goose. I think when he got home it didn't make any difference. What it was a goose.
Well, I'm Jeff Smitten, and I'm department head in English, and I came here in about 1990, and Ken, I made my graduate advisor right away because he was very involved with graduate students. But my favorite story really concerns our professional travel, because I have sort of bad travel karma. Almost every time I go somewhere, something goes wrong. And every time Ken and I traveled, things really went wrong, very badly wrong. The first time I made him go on a recruiting trip, we had to go to Chicago. We got there, they had lost our hotel reservations, and we had to scramble around among hotels and find another place to stay, and that stressed Ken out because he likes things sort of arranged systematically. Then a few years later, we went back to Chicago doing the same thing, and on that trip, we left the airport. It was very late at night, it was like midnight, and we left the airport only to find that a potato truck had overturned on the highway, and we were stalled in traffic for at least 2 or 3 hours while they cleaned up the mess. And unfortunately we had forgotten to use the restrooms when we left the airport, and arrived at the hotel in a considerable state of agony. And Ken was starting to get pretty leery of going anywhere with me, so then I made him go to San Francisco one year for recruiting. And there again, the airport was fogged in both times, both when we went and when we came back. Planes were delayed. We got here, we had to miss the connection, so we were a day late. We had to wait at the airport for a day. And he reached the point of saying, I simply won't travel with you anymore, because everything keeps going wrong. Well, my turn to drive him to Ogden came up, and it was on that trip that he nearly died, because the stent in his body slipped, and he became immediately infected and was extremely ill. Had to come back in an ambulance. They thought in the ambulance that he was going to die in Brigham City, and I got Ken to the hospital here finally, and he simply looked at me from the hospital and said, no more. So
start now?
Sure.
Okay, my name is Marilyn Henry. Used to be Marilyn Anderson. I used to have long blonde hair. I was the hippie. I was the baby of the wild bunch. And I remember so many times that we had so much fun and drank too much and had parties that went on forever and ever. And I remember walking people around the block from the Wilds house. And I remember a lot of special things when my friend Katie, who is no longer here with us, when we would get together for a softball game or whatever it was, the ball game in Hyde Park, and you would have us over after, and we would do poetry. We'd write one line, and we were just doing continuous poetry that was, I don't know, what stream of consciousness, I suppose that's what it would be. And I just remember that you helped me so much. And I remember that Ken had the most, his beard was soft. I know every time we greeted each other it was a kiss, and it's like, oh, I love this beard. And so I just really, it was just nice to have so many friends and so many beautiful people. And we were in that era when everybody was confused or not confused, and everybody was playing, oh, we're going here, we're going there, everybody was doing things, and you and Glenn had that calming thing of fishing. And I love to fish myself, but I was not going to intrude into that. I felt like that was really a very private moment for you, and that was like a buddy thing. But I remember times at the bistro and the Cactus when we were pretty wild. That's when we were called the Wild Bunch, mostly because of Glenn and Ann Wild. They would have their wild parties, the wild New Year's Eves, and all of these wild times. And I also remember the quiet times of Blacksmith Fort Canyon and times at the Western Writers Conference when there was a moment or two of softness, a moment or two of silence, or all of a sudden somebody would say, do you really know that person? Or they would say other things, and it was just such a good feeling. I remember I got to know you so much better through these. And Ken was just, he was, I don't know, it's not like an idol. He was more like a big brother, father, lover, whatever image to me. And it was something that you can't replace. And those are the times you can't replace. And I appreciate everything that was done for me to help me be myself and to find out that I was a real poet also, and that I could write. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Gina Wickwar, and the year that Ken was made Poet Laureate, I decided to have a party for him in honor of his being Poet Laureate. So I called Ken and I said, you make up the guest list, and he did. He sent me people he wanted to be there, and I said, and I sent out invitations, but I said the price of admission is that you had to write a poem to get in. So Bobby said, I'll take care of buying a cake. I'll get a cake for her. And I said, okay. So Bobby was off to get a cake. So that night, a whole group of friends assembled. Star and her husband, and Paige and Jeff and Karen and Lynn. And Bobby was there. Come on over, Bobby. And Bobby, again, like I said, was off to get the sheet cake for this whole thing. So, so we stood there, and when Ken arrived as a guest of honor, and people read their poems. Well, they were hysterical. Yeah. One of them was this: Ken is nice, Ken is good, Ken lives in the neighborhood. And the other poem I think was memorable was Roses are red, violets are blue, Ken is poet laureate, and I'm not. but Star had a beautiful one. Karen wrote a song and played it on her guitar. And so all of us were drinking wine and scotch. And finally it came the time, after all the hors d'oeuvres, to open the cake. And it was in the cake box still. And Bobby, do you want to talk about this?
Well, I had checked because I was sure that they were going to spell poet laureate wrong. And so when I picked it up, I peeked in and sure enough it was spelled right. But I didn't look at the whole cake.
I know.
Now you could tell.
So it's on my kitchen counter, and Bobby and I are there ready to light all the candles because we were going to put candles on it. We flipped it open, and there was Ken, and we all practically fell on the floor because it said, "Congratulations, Ben, poet laureate." Oh my God!
So he was Ben ever after.
He was Ben ever after.
I'm Mitch Butterfield. I remember that when I first met Ken, I was at a party and I really didn't know who he was. And a brand new grad student told me how she was so intimidated by PhDs, and I was fairly new too. And I says, well, what's a PhD? A post-hole digger? I got one of them. And I says, no, PhDs don't bother me a bit, you know, because they know what they know, but can they do this? Yeah. And you know, Ken always liked to tell jokes. We always had a dirty joke for each other. We always made each other laugh. And I was really comfortable around Ken all the time. He just made me feel so welcome. Even though I wasn't a student, I was just I guess I followed Star around. So wherever Star went, I went, and I've met some really neat people because of that. And Ken was one of the neatest people I've ever met.
I'm Deborah Hughes. I am a recovering accountant. I live in Moab, Utah. And Ken was kind of a father figure to me. He kind of saved my life at one point. When I first got divorced from my husband, I had 3 young sons. They were in early elementary school, and I had decided to go back to school and try and get a degree. And I had very low self-esteem. I was economically very poor, and I decided to take a poetry class because I had been writing some poetry and just needed an English credit. So I took Ken's beginning poetry class, and the first night he walked into class and he said, I don't give A's in this class, so just be prepared for that. I save A's for people that have talent and are going to go on and take other poetry classes and become poets. And so I had no expectations. I just was fulfilling a education requirement, and I went home and wrote some poems about my life changing and things that were going on and trying to raise kids on next to nothing. And I brought my poems back and handed them in and got them back the next week, and there were A's. And I was floored. I didn't know what to think. It gave me a different sense of who I was and what I could do, and it helped me to take a hold of my life and realize that maybe I had something more than what I had been told that I didn't. And so I kept writing, and he tried to get me to change my major to English from accounting, but I felt like I needed to raise my 3 sons, and I didn't foresee at that time how I could do that with an English degree. So I got a degree in accounting, and went to San Diego and worked for a large accounting firm, and eventually started my own business, and have recently sold my business and have started writing poetry a lot again. And poetry has become my life. It is how I live. It is how I see life. It is a way of life. And sometimes I have a love and hate relationship with words, because they mean so much, but sometimes they become so little in our language and what we say and do to each other. But at the same time, I can see how they change lives. And as I have watched Ken in his process of dying, and the love that he has given and brought with his words, and it has been a wonderful gift. And he has given many gifts to me and to other people, and it's been a wonderful thing today to be in an auditorium with those people and see him and his words and what they mean to people and his family, and to be a part of that.
I'm Paige Smitten, and I've never written any poetry, at least not since middle school, when people do write poetry. But I am a cancer survivor. I had breast cancer almost 15 years ago, and hadn't thought about it much after the 5-year sort of you're cured period and the occasional glitch that comes. And then with Ken's diagnosis, it reminded me what I had forgotten before, that I swore to myself I'd never forget when I was sick, about how important life was, friends, family, and everything. And so in a way, he's taught me a new lesson, or an old lesson, over again. And I kept waking up at night the last several weeks before he died with a line in my head, and I thought, okay, this is a poem. I don't write poetry, but maybe I can try. And this is what I ended up with. The poet. He strings words together as pearls, small knots binding feelings and images, given to those who read, listen, watch. A matched strand, luster of love inside a damaged shell. He talks quietly to Gus, dog, and Bobby, wife. Animals' friends absorb his wisdom. Birds' onyx eyes at feeders outside his sickbed window. Dogs' eyes liquid brown. Cats' shiny emerald. Spouse's eyes luminous with tears. He reads words, oysters' perfection within a marred shell. He shows us how to die, with whispers, smiles, grimaces, and kisses. His fingers tap keys, polishing poems and messages. His voice fastened to friends, family. His fingers on life's string, a rosary of pain.
Okay. My name is John Smitten, and I have a story about Ken. You may or may not be aware of the existence of Grandparents' Day. I guess it's like Mother's Day or something. You know, it sounds kind of like one of those Hallmark holidays, like Secretary's Day or something like that. But anyway, at my old elementary school, for Grandparents' Day, students were encouraged to bring their grandparents to school, and in class, all the students and their grandparents would sit down and they would have a tea of sorts. You know, and because my real grandparents, they live in California, and Californians tend not to come to Utah without a very good reason, we decided for Grandparents' Day that Ken could serve as my grandpa. And so he came to school with me, and I was like, this is Ken Brewer, my pretend grandpa. And so he kind of earned the moniker my substitute grandpa around our house. And he's definitely served as a grandfather figure to me and my little brother. And it's definitely been almost like losing a grandfather to me. So.
I'm Susan Goodwin, and I knew Ken when I worked as a school psychologist in Preston in 86 to 92. And I have lost track of him and didn't know of his illness and his death. But when I did hear, I wrote a poem. I want to read that. And I'm not a poet, but I want to say this to Ken. Oh, Ken, did you wait a while before submitting to medical care? A hunter's scorn of weakness and frailty, keeping you home, waiting, knowing well not all was well with you, and now again you wait with poems, your precise spoken rhythms, your joy in reading, poems you love, language, come alive in speaking, love and joy, now wait to be read by others. The gift of your presence, your ultimate faith in the ability of humans to love, to hope, to become, we will carry with us while we wait with you. Unfortunately, I did not get that to him before he died.
My name's Evelyn Funda, and I'm Associate Professor of English at the university, and I've been here for 10 years now. And when I first came to USU for my interview was when I first met Ken. And Ken's introduction to me was he took me out on my interview morning to breakfast at a little local place called LD's Cafe in Richmond, Utah, which is many miles north of here, about 20 miles north of Logan. And there were two other candidates who were applying for other jobs at the same time. And Ken drove us through the valley. It was a beautiful January morning. It had been snowing. He drove us through this beautiful farmland to take us to breakfast to this special place that he liked to hang out, he said. Well, LD's is a sort of dive cafe with a bar area, and people are, you know, the locals are hanging around with their big heavy cups of coffee, drinking coffee, and it's not exactly well ventilated, and so the place smells of bacon grease most days of the week. And we sat there and we had our very local breakfast, and then drove back. And what we discovered, what all three of us candidates discovered on the way back to Logan, was that we still smelled of LD's Cafe. And we smelled of LD's Cafe for the rest of the day during our interviews with the committee, during our presentations that day, during that night at our reception. So it was one of those moments where I sort of felt that Ken had taken us there to test us, to see what we were really made of and whether we could handle this with grace. And apparently he had done that with all of the candidates that year. And I've heard since that one of the candidates actually threw up afterwards. But what Ken didn't know about me was that I was just a good old farm girl. And I was loving seeing the valley and seeing all the farmland. And for me, it was a great big joke because I wasn't about to be put off by it. But that seemed to me to sort of be Ken in a nutshell. That was Ken saying, can you handle this? Can you handle living here? And can you handle being a real person who isn't daunted by something like LD's Cafe?
My name is Bill Ransom. I first met Ken Brewer here in 1973 when I was with the Poets in the Schools program and pioneering here in Utah. And he was somebody who thought I might need a cup of coffee since I was new in town, and informed me that I had had the first cup of coffee in the grade school that I was teaching at, and the principal had objected. So I knew I was going to like Ken right away. But the story I'd like to tell is of the one time I talked him into fishing in Washington State. We'd fished here in Utah and had a great time, but I told him, you know, if you haven't caught a salmon in a river, you really haven't lived. And we'd had a really good season. My fishing buddy there and I had caught a lot of fish, and we were pretty cocky, and I got Ken in for a reading as an excuse to go fishing. And so we went. We went down to the North Nema River. And it was low, and the tide was low. And so the approach to the river was mud, and it was mud up to the knees of hip boots. And it was a struggle. The fishing was a struggle, and sure enough, that was the day none of the three of us caught a thing. And we worked our butts off. And Ken still had a good time, and he was as enjoyable as ever. But the next time I came to Logan, and he was telling the story, he explained to all of his friends that I took him fishing at this place called the Nema River, which in Indian means river of mud with no fish. And his big adventure of the day was that he had got himself turned around in his hip boots and fell over, and it was pretty hard to get him out. I wasn't quite sure we were going to make it. It was a struggle, but as usual, he had his good humor. And I guess I wanted to tell a part 2 story, and that was when I was dating the person who became my wife. Ken was really worried. I was up here and staying with him a lot. He was worried because I didn't dress well, and he was afraid that I would live the rest of my life alone if I didn't shape up. So he dressed me. He gave me probably a dozen of his old shirts, and sort of showed me how to wear them so that I'd be acceptable out there. And she married me. So he must have been right.
I'm Lorian Escalante. I'm Star Coolbrook's daughter. Star was one of Ken's students. And I just wanted to say that Ken gave my mom a voice, and I think through that gave me a voice in passing. So I just wanted to say that the first time I met Ken was in the Raby West building, just probably in about the second year that my mom was in school there. And she told me about him, and I really wanted to meet him, but I was very, very shy, and I was really intimidated by professors in general. But I climbed the stairs there in the Raby West building, and I got to the top of the stairs, and I saw the door was open, and I just kind of leaned in, and Ken was leaned back in at the chair at his desk, and he kind of looked up over this book that he was reading, and I came in and I introduced myself kind of in this way. I'm sort of introducing myself now, kind of unsure of myself and kind of feeling weird, like I'm on stage with nothing to say. And I said, "Hey, Ken," or actually it was, "Hey, Dr. Brewer," which I realize now was probably totally just, nobody calls him Dr. Brewer. And we started talking, and I was just trying to, you know, tell him about myself. And at the time I didn't even know what I was interested in, and I was just in school and very young and really naive, and I just had no idea what I was doing there. And I asked him, you know, why poetry? You know, why not novels or fiction? And he said, "Well, I just don't really have the attention span for really long things, and I can sit down and I can do a poem and I can have it done in a short amount of time, and it gives me a lot of satisfaction." And I just remember thinking that I could go to school and I didn't have to be a novelist, or, you know, I didn't have to, you know, I guess I just always had this impression that to be an English professor you had to be able to write these huge documents, and it just gave me this amazing shift in my perspective of what writing could be and what writers could be. And so I guess that was sort of my first exposure to poetry and to literature, and just realizing that it didn't have to be one thing or another. You just did what you felt you needed to do, and you write because you need to write. And it was just a total revelation. So thanks to Ken for waking me up, for giving my mom a voice, really for saving her life, which really in essence saved mine.